Montana Territory, October 1874. The wind off the Bitterroot Mountains had teeth that afternoon, and it bit hard. Snow flurried in mean little circles across the dry flats, stinging exposed skin like needles. Hester Dallon's boots were cracked at the sole, soaked through, and every step felt like walking on ice. Her fingers were stiff and red. She had no gloves, no food, no money, and no one left in the world. She had not meant to survive the ambush. The wagon had been stopped by two men with bandanas and rifles near the Blackfoot River 3 days ago. Her husband, Jonah, had stood in front of her. He was dead before he hit the dirt. They took everything from her: blankets, supplies, the meal, and left her with nothing but bruises and a torn dress. And they left her alive. She had walked west. Not because she had a plan, but because the sun had risen there, and she had figured it was as good a direction as any. Now her lips were cracked, her breath ragged, and her legs were shaking. She dropped to her knees just before sunset, fell forward into the snow like a felled tree. She did not care if she woke again. But she did. She felt heat before she opened her eyes. A fire crackled close by, warm and sharp, smelling with pine and sage. Her head ached. She sat up slowly, blinking against the orange light. A man crouched a few feet away, feeding another stick into the flames. He had dark hair, long enough to brush his collar, and a face that looked carved by weather and time. His coat was patched but thick. He glanced at her then, not startled, just watchful, like he had been expecting her to wake. "You were passed out in the snow," he said. His voice was low, steady. "About a mile back. I almost rode right past you." She squinted, unsure if he was real. "I thought I died." "You did not," he said simply. He handed her a canteen. "Drink." She hesitated, then took it. The water was cold but clean. It felt like life down her throat. "I am Hester," she said. The man nodded once. "Yale Thorne." She looked around. His horse was hobbled nearby, saddlebags resting against a rock. A small skillet sat beside the fire, something warm and meaty cooking inside. You stopped for me?" she asked. "I do not leave folks to freeze," he said. "Especially not women left for dead." She swallowed hard. The firelight danced across his face. He looked tired but not cruel. That mattered more than anything. "I have nothing," she whispered. "Not a cent. No home. No one." Yale stirred the skillet, then reached behind him and handed her a rolled-up wool blanket. "Then you take the fire and eat what I got. That is your start." Her eyes burned. She did not cry. There were no tears left. But she held the blanket like it was gold. He passed her a tin plate, filled with rabbit and beans. She ate slowly. Her hands trembled, but she kept eating. "You from around here?" he asked after a while. "Used to be. Lived in Bozeman with Jonah. He was my husband." Yale nodded, letting her speak without pushing. "They killed him. Took everything." She stared into the fire. "They meant to kill me too, I think. But I was not worth wasting the bullet." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just true. "I am sorry," he said. She looked at him. His voice was quiet, but sincere. "What about you?" she asked. "You alone?" He nodded. "Been riding for years. Nowhere to be, really." "I trap, trade, move on." She studied his face. There was a sadness in him. Not sharp like hers, but deep. "You saved me. I just did what was right." "No," she said. "You stopped. You shared your fire. You saved me." Yale looked over at her, his eyes steady. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." That night she slept under the stars, wrapped in his spare blanket. Near the fire he kept going. He did not touch her. He did not ask for thanks. He just kept the fire warm. The next morning came pale and cold. She woke to coffee brewing and the sound of his horse snorting in the wind. "Still alive?" she murmured. Yale handed her a mug. And warm. They packed up slow. She did not ask where they were going. She just followed him. Her legs ached, but she kept moving, because she had nowhere else to go. 3 days passed. He taught her how to walk without tiring fast, how to watch for prints in the snow, how to catch rabbits with wire. He gave her his spare gloves and mended her boots with thick twine and tar. He never asked about what happened. But he always waited when she needed to stop. Always looked back to make sure she was still with him. One night, after a silent supper, he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You do not have to keep going with me," he said. "I want to," she answered. He turned to her, eyes searching. "Why?" "Because you stopped," she said simply. "Because you were kind. Because I feel safe." He looked away, jaw tight. "I am not always good company. You are better than anyone I have known." He said nothing. But he stayed beside her. When she leaned her head against his arm, he did not move away. That night sleep came easier. Each day, she felt stronger. Her cheeks were less hollow. She started to laugh again, quiet and unsure at first, but real. Yale had a dry way of talking, but sometimes he said something that made her smile so wide it hurt. And when she did, he looked at her like he had learned something new. They reached a small trading post near the Shields River on the 7th day. He traded pelts for flour, salt, and coffee. She stood beside him like they had done it 100 times. "You want to head back east?" he asked once they were away from the post. "No," she said. "There is nothing there for me." He nodded slowly. "You could come with me. I do not stay in one place long, but I would like the company." Her heart beat fast. "I would like that." He looked at her a long moment. "You sure?" "Yes." He reached for her hand. Rough fingers, warm and steady. She held on tight. "I am not much," he said. "You are everything," she whispered. And he kissed her then. Slow, careful, like he was making sure she wanted it. She did. It was not fire. It was warmth. It was comfort. It was home. She had been left for dead. But he had shared his fire. And she had given him her heart. They crossed into lower valleys where the snow had not yet taken root, the earth still holding warmth from the last of autumn. Cottonwoods clung to their yellow leaves in the windless hush, and the air smelled of river silt and drying moss. Yale led them along lesser trails, ones known more to elk than men, avoiding the main roads where questions waited. They camped beneath a bluff one evening, the sun dipping behind the hills like it had no urgency. Hester gathered dry twigs and peeled bark from fallen limbs, her fingers stronger now, her gait sure-footed. She'd stopped trembling when she lit fires. Yale returned from the creek with 2 trout hung on a willow switch. He laid them out and began to clean them with the edge of a worn knife. "You fish quiet," she said. He glanced up. "Fish don't like chatter." She sat across from him, brushing her hands clean. "You always this careful with your words?" He paused, then resumed his work. "Don't see the use in saying things twice." She tilted her head, watching him scale the fish. "What sort of places have you seen?" "Plenty. Kansas, Idaho, bits of Oregon. Spent a winter in the San Juans. Worked a mill once near Bannack. Left when things turned rough." "Rough?" she asked. "Folk drew lines. Too many guns, not enough grain. Sounds like everywhere," she said, and he gave a low huff, something close to a laugh but not quite. After supper, she sat with her knees drawn up, rubbing warmth into them. He poured her the last of the coffee, then leaned back against a rock, legs stretched out beneath his coat. She traced the rim of the tin cup with her thumb. "Do you believe in anything?" Yale's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Faith. Providence. Or is it all just chance?" He took a long breath, eyes fixed on the fire. "Used to believe everything came from somewhere. That there was a reason." He looked at her then. Now I think sometimes the world just breaks wrong. And we do what we can after. She nodded slowly. That's honest. The wind stirred the trees, and somewhere nearby, a night bird called once, then ceased. You ever think about settling? She asked. His jaw tightened. Sometimes. But I always move on before I can think too long. Why? I've seen what happens when a man stays too long in one place. People expect things. You let someone down once, they never let you forget it. She stared into the fire, then said, I don't expect you to fix me. He looked over sharply. I didn't mean, I know you didn't, she said. I just want you to understand. I'm not following you because I've got nowhere else to go. I'm following you because I choose to. He said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, that's more than I deserve. No, she said, her voice steady. It's not. They slept close that night, not out of need but choice. Her back against his chest, his arm loose around her waist. He breathed slow and even, like the world had finally quieted. By morning, they reached a cluster of cabins near the confluence of two creeks, a place called Willow's Rest. There was a smithy, a mercantile, and a faded chapel with a bell that hadn't rung in years. Yale traded a fox pelt for a sack of oats and a small tin of lard. Hester bartered a length of threadbare lace for a pair of wool stockings and a tin comb. As they passed the chapel, she paused, reading the names etched into a weathered board nailed by the door. Yale watched her. You want to go in? She shook her head. Not today. They stayed 2 nights in the lean-to behind the stable, Yale fixing a broken hinge for the owner in exchange for space and grain. Hester helped a woman named Ruth draw water and scrub linens. She didn't speak of the past, and no one asked. On the second evening, Yale found her near the creek, sleeves rolled to her elbows, bare feet in the cold shallows. Didn't peg you for the waiting type, he said. She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard before. Light, unguarded. I'm not. But I wanted to feel something clean. He sat on a flat rock nearby, watching the water slide around her ankles. You plan to stay here? She looked up. Do you want to? He didn't answer right away. Then, I don't mind staying if it means you won't be alone. She stepped out of the water, toes white and red from the chill. I won't be if you're here. He stood, offering his coat. She took it without hesitation, wrapping herself tight in its warmth. They walked back slow, dusk falling in soft layers. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But her hand found his as they walked, and he didn't let go. Behind the stable that night, he turned to her after the lantern was out. You sure this is what you want? She reached across the space between them, fingers brushing his jaw. I've never been more sure. He leaned into her touch, eyes closed. Then I'll stop running, he said. You already have, she whispered. And they laid down together, not just for warmth, but because the world had offered them shelter in one another. She curled into his side, and his arm held her like he meant to keep her. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The first snow laid itself down in the night like a quiet agreement. By morning, the roofs of Willow's Rest were dusted white, and the air held the hush of early winter, all sound pared down to essentials. Hester stood at the edge of the stable yard, her breath rising in soft clouds as she watched Yale shoe a bay mare with a split hoof. He worked with slow certainty, each hammerstroke clean, precise. You ever think about building something? She asked, arms wrapped around herself, not for warmth but to still the nervous flutter that had grown in her chest since waking. Like what? Yale didn't lift his head, but his tone carried interest. A cabin. A place that holds when the wind turns. Something with a roof you can count on. He set the hammer down and straightened, back stiff from crouching. I've thought about it. Never seemed like the right time. She stepped closer, snow creaking underfoot. What if it is now? Yale wiped his hands on a rag tucked in his belt. You mean here? I mean somewhere we don't have to leave when the weather changes. She searched his face. I'm tired of moving just to stay afloat. He looked past her, toward the tree line. There's a stand of fir downriver. Good timber. Ground's flat near the bend. She nodded once. Then we go there. They left Willow's Rest by midday with a borrowed sled and a promise to return the mule. Yale led, quiet as always, but his shoulders were lifted in a way that made Hester feel they were walking towards something instead of away. The land beyond the creek opened into a low meadow, bordered by tall fir and tamarack. A half-frozen stream curved through it, and deer tracks wove along the bank. Yale stopped, glanced around, then pointed to a rise just above the water. There, he said. Some'll hit it early. Trees'll break the wind. Hester walked the space slowly, running her fingers over a moss-covered stump. It feels right. They worked from first light to dusk. Yale felled trees while Hester stripped bark and stacked limbs for kindling. Her palms blistered, but she didn't stop. She liked the ache of honest labor, the way it left no room for ghosts. One evening, as the frame of the cabin began to take shape, she sat on a half-plane beam, watching the sky bruise purple with dusk. Yale joined her, his hands streaked with pine pitch. You ever build one before? She asked. He shook his head. Watched others. Paid attention. She tilted her head. You always learn by watching? Mostly. Talking wastes time if your eyes are open. She smiled at that, faint but true. I used to sew late into the night. Not because I liked it, but because it was the only quiet I could find. Yale didn't speak right away. Then he said, You don't have to earn your peace, Hester. You already paid. She looked down at her hands. I still feel like I owe someone something. You don't know me, he said. She turned to him, meeting his eyes. But I want to give you something. Not out of debt. Out of choice. He didn't shift under her gaze. Then stay. I already have. The next days passed with rhythm. They built the walls beam by beam, the roof a patchwork of cedar shakes and tarred canvas until they could trade for proper shingles. Yale showed her how to notch planks so wind wouldn't whistle through. Hester caught a rabbit in a snare she set herself and cooked it with wild onion and salt. Inside the half-finished cabin, they laid a bed of fir boughs and old blankets. That night, as wind tapped against the unfinished walls, she curled beside him and whispered, Do you think it's possible to belong again? Yale brushed her hair back from her cheek, his fingers callous but careful. Not the way it was. But maybe something better. Something you build yourself, piece by piece. She leaned into his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and slow. Then we build it. And in that quiet space between the wind and the fire's glow, they began to. The roof held through the second snow. It came down heavy one night, wet enough to slump the canvas over the firewood pile and soak their boots through. But inside the cabin, the wind passed over without finding a way in. The hearth Yale built from creekstone drew clean, and the smoke curled upward like it had someplace to be. Hester watched it from the cot, wool blanket pulled to her chin. Her damp stockings hung above the fire on a forked stick. Yale set down a bowl beside her, steam rising from it. I boiled the last of the cornmeal. Mixed in dried apples. She sat up, pushing the blanket aside. That was your breakfast. I'll eat later. She took the bowl, holding it in both hands for warmth. You always give away what's yours. I don't keep what I don't need. You ever think about what you do need? She asked, blowing over the surface of the mush. He sat across from her, back against the log wall. Hard to say. Maybe a dry roof. A good knife. Somebody to wake up beside. Hester looked down into her bowl. Her voice was quiet when she asked, And do you feel like you've got those now? I do. She didn't answer, but her fingers brushed his knee as she leaned forward to set the bowl aside. The next day, the snow melted down to patches, revealing the uneven ground of the yard. Yale set to work sawing boards for a shutter, and Hester dug out the ditch behind the cabin where water had begun to pool. She worked with a rusted spade, sleeves rolled, fingers raw, but her breath came steady now, and she no longer paused to catch it. By late afternoon, she found him splitting a pine log into planks near the edge of the woods. His shirt was off, hung across a branch. The skin of his back was marked with healed scars, straight and narrow, like lashes. She crouched by the stump and waited until he noticed her. "You keep secrets," she said. "I don't call it that." "Then what do you call it?" "Choosing what matters." "And what don't." She reached out and ran her fingers down one of the old welts. "Who did it?" "Rail gang boss. Missouri. I left before the season ended. Didn't like his way with the men." She stood slowly. "You ever think about going back?" "No," he said. "I came west for a reason." "And what reason's that?" He looked up at her, axe still in hand. "Same as yours. To outlive what nearly ruined me." She nodded once. "Then let's not waste the second chance." That night, she sat beside him on the cot, brushing his hair back while he leaned into her shoulder. They didn't speak. The fire cracked low. Outside, the night held its breath. Weeks passed. They made a table from 2 joined planks. She stitched a curtain from an old feed sack. He carved a latch for the door that didn't stick in the cold. They traded pelts for coffee and flour at a trapper's shack 2 miles off, where a man named Carver lived with a hound that barked at the sky. "He asked if you were my wife?" Yale said on the way back, walking ahead with the flour sack slung over one shoulder. "What did you tell him?" "I said yes." She stopped. "You did?" He turned to face her, the snow crunching under his boots. "Didn't seem like a lie." She caught up to him, heart thudding. "It's not." He took her hand, rough fingers closing over hers. "Then I'll ask you proper. When we've built the stairs and the roof don't leak? When you've got a dress without holes and I've got more than 2 shirts? I don't need any of that." "I know," he said. "But I want to give it." She leaned up and kissed him, there in the half-melted snow, with the wind curling around them and the mountains waiting behind the trees. He held her close, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she was surviving something. She felt like she was living. The stairs were finished by early March, pegged in place with pine dowels Yale carved by hand. Hester stood at the top of them that morning, brushing sawdust from her skirt hem, looking out the narrow loft window they'd framed just before the first freeze. Snow still clung to the shaded hollows beneath the trees, but the air smelled faintly of wet bark and thawing earth. She heard Yale below, sorting tools into the crate he kept beside the hearth. His footsteps were easy, unhurried. Something in him had shifted with the turning of the season. He moved like a man who knew exactly where he meant to stay. She came down slow, her palm trailing along the smooth rail he'd planed the night before. "You thinking of planting anything?" she asked, kneeling to sweep the last curls of wood from the floorboards. He looked up from the crate. "A few rows of turnip. Maybe onion if the seed's good. Could fence off a small patch down by the bend. I can ask Ruth back in Willow's Rest if she's got seed left." She was drying squash when I helped her with the linens. "You'd go back there alone?" She leaned her hip against the table they built together. "It's not so far. And I'd like to see her again." He stood, brushing his hands clean. "I'll go with you." She tilted her head, curious. "You said you don't care for places that remember you." "I didn't say I never go back." She smiled faintly. "All right. Then we go together." They left the next morning, walking the sled trail with the mule packed light. The snow had crusted over, firm enough to carry weight. Hester wore her mended shawl and the wool stockings she traded for, her hair coiled tight beneath a scarf. Willow's Rest hadn't changed much. The chapel remained quiet, its bells still mute. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the mercantile door slapped hollow against its frame in the stiff wind. Ruth was hanging laundry from a line strung between 2 poles. Her eyes lit when she saw Hester. "Well, I'll be," Ruth said, drawing her into a firm hug. "You look like you've been eating decent and sleeping warm. And you've got color back in your face." "This is Yale," Hester said, stepping aside. Ruth gave him a once-over. I remember. You bought lard and didn't say 3 words. I talk when I need to, he said. Ruth chuckled. Well, you must have done something right. She's standing straighter now. Inside Ruth's small home, Hester accepted a cup of weak coffee while Ruth pulled down a tin box of seeds. They talked about soil and timing, about what grew poorly last year and what might do better now. Yale stood near the stove, quiet, but Hester could feel him watching her, steady as ever. Later, on the walk back, she asked, You ever had a real home before this? I stayed some places long enough to call them that. But they never held. She nodded. Why do you think this one will? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, Because it's not just mine. They planted 2 weeks later. The earth was still stubborn in places, but the frost had lifted enough to work. She pressed seeds into the soil while he hoed rows alongside her. A hawk circled above the trees, and she paused to watch it, one hand resting on her knee. Yale stopped, too, leaning on the handle of the hoe. You still thinking of leaving if the roof leaks? I told you I'd ask you proper. She blinked at him, unsure she'd heard right. He stepped forward, pulling something from his pocket. A band of braided horsehair, dark and fine, with a small silver bead in the center. It's not gold, he said. But I made it for you. She stared at it, then up at him. You made this? He nodded once. I wanted to give you something that won't wear thin. She took it, holding it in both hands like it might melt. Yes. He looked briefly startled. I didn't finish asking. You don't need to, she said. Yes. He exhaled, just once, and it was the sound of something settling into place. They married in the clearing behind the cabin the following Sunday. Ruth came, bringing a loaf of bread and a clean bonnet. Carver from the trapper's shack stood witness, his hound lying quiet at his feet. Yale wore his better shirt and shaved with a borrowed razor. Hester tied back her hair with a strip of blue cloth Ruth had saved from a bolt of calico. They didn't speak vows so much as look at each other and nod when the moment came. She took his hand, and he held it like he'd never let go. The wind moved through the trees, and the creek murmured below, and that was all the ceremony they needed. Afterward, they ate stew beside the fire, the door opened to let in the spring air. Ruth left before dusk, and Carver wandered off with a nod, his hound trotting behind. Hester and Yale stood at the edge of the porch, watching the light shift across the hills. The land smelled of pine and damp moss, the air soft against their skin. Tomorrow I'll start on the smokehouse, he said. I'll finish the curtain for the loft. He brushed his knuckles down her arm. There's no one else I'd rather build with. She turned to him, her expression quiet, full. Then let's keep building. They went inside, closing the door against the cooling air. He drew her close, not with urgency, but with a kind of reverence. She leaned into him, her hands resting over the place his heart beat steady and sure. Outside, the wind passed gently through the firs, and the small cabin held firm against it, light flickering in the window. Years passed, but the cabin never shifted. The smokehouse stood. The garden grew in patchwork rows. A cradle was carved when the time came, pine sweet and smooth, and Yale's hand never once faltered when he lifted their daughter into it. They grew older there, side by side, the lines on their faces carved by wind and laughter, not grief. She kept the horsehair ring on a shelf by the bed, though she never took it off. He built a bench beneath the window for her sewing, and she embroidered the border with twining fir branches and the outline of a hawk. They never left. They never needed to. The roof held. The fire stayed warm. And every morning she woke with his hand over hers, the world quiet around them and the promise they'd made still true.